trouble. So we need to make sure that we understand what kind of structure, what kind of business we're bringing in. And in a way, what we see it from our end is that we need to understand, we need to be open relationship between us and the merchants and to disclose everything up front. That makes the relationship a lot easier in the future. So that's how we see it from our end.
Right. So Ryan, anything on that? Or?
I come from a slightly different perspective because I'm more on the sell side. For me, I like to have a good relationship with that client, and I like to be very open, so I want to know all the corporations, all the IBOs. I want to make sure that they're signing them. I want to make sure that they understand, like Suresh said, I want them to understand the model that they're getting into. It's got to be fully disclosed, so I want to make sure that that advertiser's doing all those right steps, because if not, it's going to hurt us in the end. And so I guess my compliance check is just making sure that they're doing certain procedures along the way to help us all out. And then it's just a matter of working with them to make sure that applications are clean, websites are clean, everything can move forward for them to help protect them as well through diversification, I guess, of everything as a whole. So,
great. All right, so once we have that relationship established, now we get up, we get our mids, we start off and running. Probably the next thing we all are curious about is, what are we looking for with ratios? Like, what are the hot buttons? We know that there's chargeback ratios, refund ratios, approval ratios. Talk a little bit about the benchmarks, Ryan, maybe, and what you kind of look for, and then how well defined are those?
I have to laugh because what I might say today could change completely tomorrow. I mean, the processors are always changing what that chargeback threshold should be. And so it goes back to knowing that processor and what they're looking for. And if we're talking about a startup merchant versus somebody that's existing, it's a different conversation. But a lot of the guys that are bringing a lot of new business, startup business, they've got to understand that if their chargebacks start, and I don't want to throw out numbers, but if you're going 4 or 5% and you're still trending up, you're in trouble. If you can keep those more stable, 3, 4%, you're going to be much safer. On a refund, you have to be careful as well, and I know a lot of people use the Ethica Verify programs. 15, 20%, you're pretty good. If it starts climbing higher than that, then the processor might look at that and say, hey, there's a potential problem here. Too many refunds are going through, which you kind of think that might be an oxymoron that too many refunds are existing, but that does place that processor at a certain risk level as well.
And I'll leave, like, from your point of view as a PSP, and for those of you who don't know, a PSP takes a lot of different merchants and puts them under one kind of bid together. When you're managing that mid, do the processors talk with you about where they want your overall portfolio?
Exactly. So basically, at Pizza, we operate a little bit differently because we're an e-wallet service provider as well. So not only our source of funding that wallet is not only credit card, we also take in alternative payment methods, local payment method options, and other payment methods. But the idea is that when we board for credit card processing specifically, we are a PSP. So we take the entire volume, and that volume obviously helps bring down our overall chargeback. But the processors still do look at our overall chargeback ratio. But we have a lot of the systems in place to make sure that our chargeback ratio is dropped. So we have, for example, fraud detection, fraud prevention software is built in. We also have resolution centers. So if the merchant has any issue, if the customer has any issues with the merchant, they can go through our resolution center before reaching and talking to the credit card company to initiate a chargeback. The refunds as well go from wallet to wallet, not necessarily directly to the credit card. So that kind of brings the refund issue lower as well. So from our point of view, we manage our own chargeback portfolio as a global level, not at a merchant-specific level. And if one of the merchants is let's say, is causing a high chargeback ratio, that affects everyone else. So what we try to do is work with that merchant individually to see what we can do to help them reduce their chargeback. And unfortunately, if the chargeback ratio is still going up, or they are issuing a lot of refunds, then we have to maybe shut down the merchant or do some alternative.
And to follow up on that, Suresh, like have you seen with the high refund ratio? I mean, that's a relatively new, in the past, no one really cared. Like refund ratios were, they were just refund ratios. Everyone just cared about the 1% under chargebacks and moved on with their lives. What are you seeing with refunds right now?
Well, we work with pretty much all the ISOs in the industry because of the merchant base that we represent. And what we have seen is there are different things that goes into play when we are looking at the refund and the chargeback ratio. One, of course, the merchant, what industry they are in. And also another key things that we are looking at right now is the position the ISO is. If the ISO is being audited or during that particular quarter, they are actually having too many high-risk merchants and they are forced to keep their chargebacks below 1% because they look at their whole portfolio, and if they have to bring it 1%, then even 3.5% becomes an issue. I have seen that from other processors sending an email all of a sudden saying, if you don't bring it below 3%, we're going to shut it down. You look at their count might be like 20 chargebacks, which shouldn't be a big deal because one card you have 20, 25 chargebacks, but they operate based on the position they are in. And also they juggle around the high risk and low risk merchant. So I would say keeping it 3 to 3.5 would be a safe position. And refunds I have seen anywhere between 20% all the way up to 30%, depending on the type of processor. But again, it changes every quarter. For example, there was one processor who called us and said, we are not going to take any high-risk merchants for the next 3 months. I said, what happened? We have way too many applications. If we have to accept new business, then we are going to go above 1%. So we don't want to take any high-risk business anymore. So they pause and they increase and they stop the operation with merchants. And the merchants are really risking their business with the high-risk ISOs, I would say.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's important too. Like, I know a lot of the faces in here, we kind of all deal with ISOs, but I mean, just like merchants are examined for their ratios, ISOs have a portfolio, they're examined just like a merchant, and the numbers are sometimes much, much stricter than you could imagine. I mean, they're trying to operate at 10 basis points, 20 basis points. They don't have the luxury of 3, 4% staying under count.
Yeah, for us it has to be lower than 1%.
Right. So when we start talking about the processors and their expectations when the chargebacks do get out of hand, Ryan, would you work with a lot of your clients regarding reduction plans, and what do they kind of expect in a reduction plan, and how much of it is checking boxes and how much of it is actually putting it into effect?
The challenge that I think we're seeing right now is a lot of people are just trying to check boxes. A lot of people, they get these chargeback reduction plan templates, and when they're asked for it, all they're doing is they're just modifying the company name, doing a different signature, pretty much just sending the same one in. The problem with that we're seeing is that because they're just checking the boxes and they're not really implementing those items, there's really no change occurring on that mid in all cases, and so there are times that those are shut down. Now, if a merchant is actually implementing some of those strategies, then their mids are going to stay up longer, but we do see that a lot where they're just checking the boxes just to fulfill that request, and then they just move past, and they think everything's fine until 30, 45 days later, their mid's closed.
So they're just buying time.
They're buying time.
Now, do you ever put them on reduction plans with the wallet, or is it more?
It's not the same traditional processing sense, so we don't have that specific in place. However, we do, when we get the chargeback requests, we look into the merchant and we try to understand why they're getting chargebacks. The idea as well is in certain cases that might help or might not help. We also might move them to their own mid if we realize they're bringing a lot of issues to us as well. So it's not necessarily reductions for them, but it will also help our own mid.
Someone else's problem.
Because now they're risking the entire mid. So we go to different providers and we get them their own mid and try to work with them. But that's how it is.
So when we're talking about reducing chargebacks and reducing ratios, obviously there's known methods that have to get verified through any number of resellers. Count, scrubbing on the front end. I think you probably talked about that a little, Ryan, and I know Brian will talk about it later. What are the thoughts, Suresh, on some artificial transactions or issuing, our friendlies, or whatever you want to call them, and what are we seeing, and what is the response of the processors right now to seeing those things?
Well, I have been challenged numerous times by merchants saying that I will run my friendlies and I'll be happy, but I tell them there is no way you can mimic a natural transaction. One, actually because of the limitation of the bins that are available, which are running the friendlies, and ISOs are pretty smart. They can identify the friendlies immediately. And I had a merchant, I told him don't do it. He went behind and then he started running the friendlies because somebody sold him on the idea. And within 30 days, the ISO came back and said, you're going to refund every one of these transactions. And he bought actually 10,000 cards, prepaid cards to run. So now he lost the cards. He also lost actually all the money because he had to refund. And pretty much he's bankrupt because that's a $30,000 investment that is gone. I always tell people that Verify, Ethoca, and the friendlies are all a temporary band-aid solution. You need to actually understand what is really going on with your chargebacks. So you need to identify the root causes of it and then create some kind of plan that can keep you at the 3.5 ratio or a little bit over that. Because in this industry, it is very tough to operate on a 2%, considering because nobody gets permission from the client prior to billing them. So by using friendlies or relying Verify and Ethoca thinking they're going to save you, one, your refund ratios are going to be high, you're paying for the alerts, you're never learning from why these are happening. So some clients say, I'm going to expect every one of my client to return the product and then I'll give a refund. There is no proven data that shows having the clients return the product is going to make sense because it increases your chargeback rate. So we primarily help them identify the root cause. They need to know exactly what is happening in their business and take some actions so that it doesn't affect their sales and also it doesn't affect their chargebacks. So it's finding the sweet spot. It takes a lot of time, but advertisers have to step forward in order to do this on the long-term basis. And that's what the top advertisers are doing. They are not actually, crashing their bids all the time. They have figured out their sweet spot and they know what the refund should be, know what their chargeback should be, and they keep the refund policy very, very flexible so that they don't have to rely on these band-aid solutions. There is no proven data about friendlies, and I would highly, discourage people from using friendlies.
So Ryan, I've got a merchant account up, and I decide that the new hot thing isn't Garcinia anymore. I want to run a acai toothpaste that whitens my teeth and helps me lose weight. What is the protocol for maybe using existing mids that are suffering for traffic and trying out new products on it, or substituting? Maybe I'm not running Garcinia anymore, but hey, they don't care. Free trial is free trial.
That's kind of a tough one. If I were a risk person, I would say don't do it, because I've seen merchants get absolutely shut down because and I understand you're just testing it out. But if the processor finds out that you are putting through a different product than what was approved for, that's an immediate termination, and it can be cause for a match. In saying that, I also understand that people are testing products. They want to see if they work. Minimize it, I guess, if you're going to do it, but I wouldn't recommend it at all. Honestly, I think it's easier if you're just going to test a product, work with whoever's setting up mids for you. Just say, hey, I need a $10,000 mid. I just want to test a product. I want to see how it performs. We'll get you a $10,000 mid so you can test a product, But that's far safer than just trying to push it under the carpet and try and run it through. And it's not to say that you're going to get caught or you're going to have problems, but if you do, the effects that that's going to have is far worse than taking 2 weeks and getting a $10,000 mid.
Now, in your case, with the PSP, it's very easy.
It's different, actually, yeah.
Fire up another TID and off you go.
Well, actually, the way it works with us is through website reviews. So the idea is that if you're selling something, you have to give us your website. And we have a team that reviews all those websites and go and make sure that the products that you're selling is what is actually being advertised, right? So they go and make sure if all of that works. If the merchant decided to create a new product, all they have to do is add a new website. Let's say there's
So it's not a full underwriting
it
process?
wouldn't be a full underwriting process. Now, what would happen is that they won't necessarily get a credit card payments right away. They might still get wallet-to-wallet payments. But then through the website review, again, we will determine whether we can allow them to process as well credit cards or not. So it becomes it's an easier process to try on new things. However, we do have cases where they're advertising product A, and then a few months later they might be doing product B, and we periodically review websites to make sure that whatever they signed up to selling, they need to keep selling that same product. Obviously, because of the risk associated with it, we need to make sure that everything is covered.
Okay, so this next question is a little bit sensitive given the fact that the way most of us make our money is billing for services. Is there a right time? Are rates negotiable? Are transaction fees negotiable? After you're up and running, is there a time when you should approach your processor? Hey, I've been running for 6 months. I'd like to go from X% down to this percent. I'd like to pay less per transaction. And when should they broach it? If my rates are too high, should I broach it? Or should I just keep running and keep my head down? So, Ryan, what would you say on that?
Honestly, I don't think there's any issue with approaching that subject and asking for lower rates. It's all going to come down to is how well are you performing. If you ask for a rate reduction, that's going to most likely go into a risk review. If they see that your chargebacks are pretty steady and they're at a low rate, most processors are going to have an issue with that. But again, if they see that that MID's processing at a higher rate, or a MID associated with that corp is higher, even though it's not the one that you may have addressed, they're going to look at all of those. And from my experience is you're going to have a harder time getting that reduced if your chargebacks are high. Now, there are some processors where we do have some flexibility in those rates, and we can certainly adjust those and help out. But there are some processors that they have their standard rates, and unless your chargebacks are low, I haven't been successful in getting them reduced.
And along those lines, Suresh, what would be kind of your take on a merchant maybe looking for a capped reserve or reserve releases? Maybe if it's 6-month rolling, which seems to be the technique and the term that never really happens, or capped reserves. When would you start that discussion, and what would it be?
Well, the way actually ISOs look at it is 3.5% is something said in the industry but never written. It's not a concrete number that they want to put it in paper. So the way they look at it is when you actually in the way of processing, and then you approach them actually on a 6-month basis and say, hey, are you okay with the rolling reserve? What we have seen is they deny that because saying your chargeback is at 3.5%. The only way out I have seen most of the merchants successful is once you stop the processing, and then they wait for 3 months and they look at their chargeback risk level, and then they release about 25% of the funds. And provided you don't receive any more chargebacks after 3 months of stopping the MID, then you have the leverage of getting the funds released after 3 months. So that's the only leverage I have seen because I've spoken with numerous processors. So clients approach us saying, can you actually help us release the reserve? I've spoken to them and they are very, very strict about their policy. The rolling reserve, yes, it's all on paper, but also according to them, you got to be at 1% for them to release the 6 months reserve every time. But I haven't seen that happening for merchants unless and until they stop processing. And on that question about the previous question, I wanted to add a point where it talks about like what kind of negotiation we can have rates. So when you actually directly work with the processor without an agent being involved, probably actually they give you a rate and they don't want to negotiate. But when you are actually working with an agent who has a little bit of markup in it, they give you leverage of negotiating the chargeback fee and then a little bit on the rates. That's about it. They always ask us, hey, are you comfortable actually lowering the rates? Because our base price is base price. So do you want to lower the rates? And if we reduce it, then they leave it up to us to reduce it. So it all depends what your relationship is with the processor. But are you going through an agent or are you going directly, and it depends on that too.
And with the wallet solutions, do you